In the quiet darkness of deserted streets, there are secrets that no one dares to discover. Seemingly harmless deliveries can lead to terrifying experiences where peace is just a thin veneer. Prepare yourself, because these stories will drag you into a haunting world where fear is not just a feeling but a reality. Story 1. That day, I was very young, only 16 years old, and taking my first steps into the world of work. I started working in a small, peaceful town where everyone knew each other and life was slow and peaceful. My first job was nothing too special, helping the chef in the kitchen, cleaning the house, doing odd jobs that adults don't have time to do. My life is simple, somewhat boring, but I don't complain because I know I need this job. After 2 months of hard work, my boss, a middle-aged man with a stern face but eyes that always contained fatigue, decided to give me a new assignment. On weekends, the official delivery boy would quit and I would replace him. I agreed without thinking much, just thinking it was an opportunity to learn more and earn some extra pocket money. But what I didn't know was that my life would change forever from that decision. That day, the main delivery boy returned to the office in a condition I will never forget. His face was pale, his eyes filled with fear, as if he had just witnessed something horrifying. His hands were shaking so much that he couldn't hold anything, and he walked into his boss's office without saying a word. A fierce argument broke out between the two. Even though I couldn't hear their words clearly, I could feel the tense atmosphere that permeated the place. After about 15 minutes, the office door opened and the delivery boy walked out. He didn't say anything, just looked at me one last time, his eyes full of pain, then left the shop. That was the last time I saw him. Over the next few weeks, I became the main delivery person, taking over his work. Even though I was a little worried about what had happened, I continued working, telling myself that everything would be okay. But the anxiety that simmered in my heart never completely disappeared. Then one fateful evening, when dusk had faded and darkness began to cover everywhere, my boss gave me a new address. It was a house located in the countryside, isolated from the rest of the town. The roads leading there were narrow, winding, and there was almost no sign of life along the way. I couldn't help but feel a vague sense of dread as I drove through the desolate fields, with only the wind whistling through the barren trees, making sounds like the sighs of lost souls. Finally, after a long and uncertain journey, I arrived in front of the old 2-story house I was assigned to. The house stood there, lonely in the middle of a desolate land, as if it had been long forgotten. The wild grass was not mowed. The surrounding trees looked like dry skeletons waiting for the end. The old porch, the rotten wooden planks, and the milk chairs that have faded over time all create an indescribable feeling of insecurity. I got out of the car, carrying the pizza, and headed for the door. A creepy feeling enveloped me as I stood in front of that door, as if something invisible was watching my every step. I took a deep breath, tried to suppress my fear, and knocked on the door. The door shook, making rattling sounds as if it hadn't been opened in years. Finally, the door slowly opened, and standing there was an old woman, probably in her 70s. She was short, thin, with skin as wrinkled as parchment and eyes. Her eyes were empty, without any emotion, but they contained a certain obsession that couldn't be expressed in words. I couldn't take my eyes off her gaze, feeling like I was being sucked into a bottomless black hole. She didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me. The silence lasted, and I started to feel really nervous. The surrounding space seemed to stop, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling through old doors and the sound of my heart beating loudly in my chest. Finally, she opened her mouth, her voice hoarse, as if the words were hissing through the cracks in her throat. She didn't immediately accept the pizza. Instead, her eyes seemed to be searching, as if she was pondering something. She began rummaging through her old purse, but her actions were strangely slow and drawn out. Every second passed like an hour, and the anxiety in my heart increased little by little. While she searched for the money, my eyes never left her thin hand, trying to guess what she was doing. My mind kept running through terrible possibilities. What if she pulled out a knife? Or worse, what if it's a gun? As I was trying to stay calm, another strange thing happened. From behind her, the faint silhouette of a man appeared in the darkness. The man was out of focus, just a blurry figure, but one thing was certain: he was moving towards the door. At the same time, another sound rang out from my left, the sound of footsteps on dry leaves, causing me to turn around in surprise. Another man, with a cold and angry face, was walking up the steps, his eyes glaring at me, as if he wanted to devour me. In that moment, everything seemed to collapse. Fear surged. I realized I had no time to think anymore. Without hesitation, I turned around, rushed towards the car, threw the pizza inside, and flipped the lock. The car started with a roar, and I sped off into the darkness, not daring to look back. The road leading out of there seemed to last forever, but I could only run as fast as I could, far away from that house, leaving behind everything that had just happened. When I got home, I sat in the car, breathing heavily, my heart beating loudly in my chest. I knew I had escaped something terrible, but I didn't know exactly what it was. I decided to hide everything and pay for the pizza left behind from my own pocket. But that peace did not last long. A few days later, when things had calmed down, I decided to tell my boss about this. He listened, his face gradually losing color as I told him the details of that terrible evening. After I finished, he immediately called the police to investigate that house. The police came and checked the house. They discovered that it had been confiscated over a year ago. But what was more horrifying was that they found 3 people living inside, 2 men and an old woman, just as I had described. These people were immediately arrested, but what haunts me the most is that no one knows what they did or planned to do to me. After that incident, I could no longer continue my delivery job. Every time I remember it, I can't help but feel shivers. I know that I was lucky to escape, but the hauntings from that terrible evening still cling to me, like a shadow that never goes away. Night dreams. Story 2. I will never forget the night I decided to take on the responsibility of delivering for my friend at the pizzeria. My friend, who usually handles deliveries, was unable to work the shift that night, and I, who usually mans the checkout counter, agreed to fill in. I thought this would be just a normal evening, but unexpectedly it would turn into a horrifying experience. That evening, I completed my first 2 deliveries without any problems. When the final shipment arrived, I was given an address about 5 miles from the bakery, a longer distance than previous trips. The GPS led me off the highway into a strange little town I had never heard of. The road leading there is narrow and dark, with narrow side roads and no street lights. The night was deep, and an eerie silence enveloped the area. As I arrived in front of the house, my sense of uneasiness increased. The house is a small house, only 1 floor, with a shabby appearance, seemingly not taken care of for a long time. Weeds grew on the front lawn, and the porch appeared abandoned. I rang the doorbell, and almost immediately, the door opened. In front of me was an older man, pale and thin-looking. He has gray skin and some thin gray hair. His eyes, even though he was smiling, made me feel uncomfortable. His smile not only did not reassure me, but also created a feeling that something was wrong. He said he would be right back and walked inside, leaving me standing outside in the cold. I waited outside while my anxiety grew. The house seemed lifeless inside, and small sounds from inside the house, such as creaking footsteps and noises of unknown origin, made me feel tense. Finally, the man appeared at the door, and his smile never left his face. He invited me inside to avoid the cold wind, but I refused. However, it was cold outside. I felt I had no other choice and went in. As soon as I entered, I felt an even colder wave. The house was not only cold but also dark, with no heating system. He led me through several rooms, and everything seemed old and unmaintained. My sense of insecurity increased as he led me to a small door leading to the basement. He explained that he often left money down there and asked me to come with him to get it. I felt an indescribable fear. The basement is completely dark and mysterious, with no light and seemingly no way out. I refused, not wanting to enter a place where I couldn't see anything below. When I was about to turn back, I heard creaking footsteps coming from the basement. I couldn't bear it any longer. The sense of danger had become too clear. When I turned around to open the door, the man was standing in front of the exit. In a moment of desperation, I punched him in the face to keep distance and quickly pushed him out of the way. I heard footsteps from the basement getting louder, and the feeling of fear almost paralyzed me. I rushed out of the house without looking back and ran toward my car. I threw the pizza in the car, turned it on, and drove away quickly. With each passing second, the feeling of suspense and fear becomes stronger. I ran through the dark streets, not daring to stop until I reached the bakery. When I got there, I told the manager everything. He immediately called the police and asked for an investigation. My manager gave me a few days off to recover, and I still don't know the results of the investigation. The manager only announced that the police had arrived at the house and discovered that the house had been abandoned for a long time. They found 3 people living there, including the man I had met. They were all arrested. That experience left a deep mark on my mind. I learned a valuable lesson about never entering a stranger's home, no matter the reason. The panic and stress I experienced became an unforgettable part of my life, reminding me of the hidden dangers in the world around me. Story 3. I will never forget that night when I was tasked with making the final delivery at a remote address I had never heard of. It was a cold and lonely night, with a strong wind blowing through winding dirt roads and few lights. I had made 2 previous deliveries without any problems, but this one made me feel uneasy from the start. As I got closer to the assigned address, things seemed to get weirder. The path became narrow and dark. The surrounding trees seemed to form a screen, obscuring vision and making the air heavy. I drove through rough dirt roads, and it felt like I was entering a desolate land. The house appeared in the dim light of the headlights, just an old, simple building lost in the middle of the forest. When I arrived, I didn't see any signs of life. There were no cars parked in the house, no lights were on, and the feeling of loneliness made me feel confused. I called my boss and asked him to check the address again to make sure I was in the right place. My boss confirmed the address was correct and advised me to knock, even though I was nervous about bringing home 4 pizzas that no one would claim. Feeling uneasy, I got out of the car and walked to the front door of the house. There is no doorbell. I have to knock vigorously. At first, there was no response from within. I feel frustration and anxiety because I feel like I'm wasting time and gas. I knocked on the door again, this time with desperation. While waiting, I started hearing rustling sounds from inside the house, as if someone was moving inside. I knocked on the door again and shouted that I was the pizza delivery person, but in response there was only silence. The feeling of uneasiness and anxiety increased, and as I was about to return to the car, I suddenly noticed a figure standing through the window. The person's eyes were wide open and staring out, unable to determine whether it was a man or a woman. His cold and threatening eyes made me feel like my blood was freezing. In a panic, I dropped the pizza and rushed back to my car. When I tried to start the car refused to start immediately. I turned the key 3 times before the engine started. As I drove out of the grass, the unusual vibration and bump felt like something was wrong. I heard a clicking sound from outside, and my car began to shake uncontrollably. I stopped and got out to check. My hands were shaking when I discovered all the tires had been slashed, not just one but all 4. This makes me feel more scared than ever. It seemed like someone had slashed my tire when I knocked on the door of the house. Feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare, I got back in my car, locked the doors, and called 911 to report the situation. The other end of the line told me to take cover and advised me to stay in the car if possible. I sat in the car, shaking with fear and the cold feeling surrounding me. The darkness of the surrounding forest adds to the sense of tension. While waiting for the police to arrive, I checked my rearview mirror, and that's when I saw the person I had seen through the window. It was a woman, her eyes wide open, and a creepy smile slowly appearing on her face. Her presence made me feel like I was on the brink of madness. In a panic, I opened the car door and rushed into the forest, ignoring the noise and fatigue. I ran in the dark, lost among the trees and bushes, until I had no strength left. I hid behind a large log on the ground, trying to control my breathing so I wouldn't be detected. Time passed like hours, but eventually I heard police sirens in the distance. With my remaining strength, I ran toward the dirt road, where the red and blue lights of a police car appeared. When the police car approached, I got out, screaming and asking for help. I feel like I'm about to collapse because I'm so tired. The police quickly picked me up and started questioning me. I try to explain everything to the best of my ability. One of 2 police cars drove to the building to check, and 2 other officers began searching the place. Finally, the police returned and found nothing but several sharp objects similar to those used to slash my tires. They guessed that it might be some crazy couple, but unfortunately, no trace of them was found. The uncertainty and indescribable fear still haunt me to this day. The incident made me decide to quit my job soon after and start working at a local grocery store. The sight of the woman with her wide eyes and creepy smile still haunts me. Every time I remember, the thrill and fear come back, and I hope no one has to experience the fear I did that night. When the last light fades and the sighs of darkness engulf you, do you still dare to step outside? Memories of those horrifying deliveries will forever be imprinted in your mind, like wounds that never heal. Remember, in this world, not every door leads to safety sometimes. They just unleash the worst things you can imagine.